Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Crime Family. I'm your co-host, AJ, and I'm here with my sisters and co-hosts, Stephanie and Katie. And this week on the show, we are going to be talking about some major updates in a case that we covered on the show. So we have some major updates in the Asha Degree case. So this was a case that we covered back in season 1 of the show. It was season 1, episode 13. And for me, I feel like I probably talked about this in our retrospective one that we did. This was a case that is one of those ones that I think about a lot, or just because it was so weird and perplexing and I just needed to know answers, but it was unsolved, and it was just kind of one of those ones that I was always very curious about. And just the circumstances of it were super weird. So I am happy to say that we have some very big developments. So I'm kind of do a little bit a quick rundown of just what the case is in case you need a reminder or maybe you've never heard of the case before. But so I'll kind of do a couple of minutes of just giving you sort of the basic facts before we get into some of the major updates. But we'll also put a link in the show notes to our episode back from season 1 on this case. So probably better if you go ahead and listen to that one first and then come back and listen to this, just so that you have the full context of the case. And then you'll hear the updates after. So and I'm assuming Katie, Steph, you guys don't know much about the updates. You haven't heard much that's out there, really. So it's kind of news for you guys. Yeah.
I heard that there was updates, but I haven't really looked into what they are.
Yeah, same.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so actually, I knew that there were updates back in September of 2024. And that's really all I thought there were, but we hadn't talked about it on the podcast. So when I was deciding to do an update episode for this one, I was just going to talk about that. But then I realized actually in February, just last month, or a few weeks ago, there was more major developments. So, and those were all news to me when I was researching these updates for this past week. So, yeah. So as a reminder, so this case happened 25 years ago. So it was in February of 2000 when 9-year-old Asha Degree went missing in the small town of Shelby, North Carolina. So it was the early morning hours of February 14th, 2000, when Asha was last seen, and she was actually last seen by a witness walking alone along Highway 18 in the pouring rain in the middle of the night. So just super weird for a 9-year-old to be walking alone, literally at 4 a.m. or something around there. So no one knew where she was going or why she had left home. And the house was actually still locked, so there was no forced entry or anything like that. And they said that Asha did have a spare key, so it was suggested that she had actually walked out of the house on her own. She took a few belongings with her and just kind of left in the middle of the night for an unknown reason to either to meet someone, or no one really knew the reasons. It was super, super weird. But her family insisted that she would just never run away. There was no reason why she would run away from home or why she should have been leaving the house in the middle of the night in the pouring rain. It was kind of stormy that night. So just super weird. And for years, there were very few clues, but there were some leads initially. So during the initial investigation, some of Asha's belongings were discovered in a shed on some property that was near the home, that were near Asha Degree's home. And some of these belongings that were found in the shed were candy wrappers, a pencil, and a hair bow. And her family said that those, the hair bow did belong to Asha. That was one that she would wear normally or regularly. And there was also, what's really weird too, is along with those belongings that they found, there was also a photograph of an unidentified young girl that was in the same location. But this girl was not Asha, and no one knew who the little girl in the photograph was or how it was connected. So that was a super weird thing as well. Further to be a photo of another young girl, same age as Asha, but not Asha. So that was super odd. And then in 2001, I forget,
did that photo, did they look similar? Could have been someone was looking for someone else and they mistook Asha for this person in the photo? Or was it completely different? You could tell the difference.
Yeah, it did look similar. Looking at them, it did, they were both little black girls, and they were around the same age. But obviously her family knew it wasn't her, but, they looked similarly enough. But yeah, it was just super weird because they found this photo and the family was like, that's not Asia. So why was there this other, like, this child in this other photo? And no, they never did identify who the girl in the photo was. So we still don't know who that person was. So that was just a kind of a weird thing. So then it was the summer of 2001. I believe it was August, where there were some construction workers who were on this construction site, and they found a backpack that was wrapped in, or that was inside, like 2 garbage bags, and it was buried off a highway in Burke County, which was, a few miles away from where she was last seen. And it was determined that this backpack did belong to Asia. Like her family said, that was the one that she always wore. And inside the backpack, there was a Dr. Seuss book. And they determined that the book was, a library book from the school library where Asia went to school. So that was the connection there. It was, the book that she had taken out from her school. And there was also a New Kids on the Block t-shirt, which the family said was not Asia's or anyone in the family. So they don't really know how that shirt got in the backpack, along with these other things. So that was super weird. But then after these findings, the case really went cold. So the FBI eventually, so there was no really other leads after 2001, and there was no reported sightings or anything like that. And then in 2016, the FBI released photos of a car that they believed could be connected. So it wasn't like the exact car, but it was like a photo of like a 1960s Thunderbird or green Thunderbird or something like that, which they think was like a car similar to that was connected, because there were witnesses that said they saw Asia getting into a car that looked like that. So in 2016, they released those images of this car. But so, yeah, and without other evidence, like, her disappearance just remained this tragic mystery, and she was never seen or heard from again. And there was no like other sightings, like I said. So just super, super weird. So then after decades of uncertainty, so investigators may be closer than they've ever been to finding answers. So there is actually quite a few breakthroughs in this case, which is really exciting. So I'm going to go into those updates now. So the investigators are actually able to use modern DNA technology to test some of the items that were found inside Asia's backpack, because of course they did keep these items as a part of the investigation. And they also tested the garbage bag that the backpack was discovered in. And when they did these new tests, there were 3 distinct DNA profiles identified. So one of them was Asia's. There was a second DNA profile that was matched to a man named Russell Underhill. And then there was a third that was matched to a woman named Anna Lee Dedman. Or they were able to determine that it was like genetically linked. Like, how they can do like genealogy testing based on DNA? It's like either her or somebody like in her direct family. But they did name her as like the one whose DNA profile was on this backpack or on these items. So this revelation, of course, led investigators to the Dedman family. And they were a family that lived in Cleveland County, which is, where Shelby is, which is the small town that Asia went missing from. So they lived there for decades. They, were kind of well known in the community. And at the time of Asia's disappearance back in 2000, Anna Lee Dedman was just 13 years old. So she was one of the daughters of this couple. And her connection to this case raised some serious questions, because it also revealed that Russell Underhill, whose DNA was also present, he was someone who had actually been living in a property that was owned by the Dedman family. So that's how those two kind of are connected to each other. And the Dedman family actually owned like several properties in the area. So obviously they have money, and they would, have a ton of residences, and they would rent them out. So Russell Underhill was a tenant in one of their properties. So when they found out this information, they actually learned that Russell had passed away in 2004. So just a few years after this had happened. And so, they obviously isn't really much they could do. They couldn't question him or talk to him. But Anna Lee Dedman and her sisters and her parents were still very much alive. And so in September 2024, the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office working alongside the FBI, they executed a search warrant at the home of Roy and Connie Dedman. So those were the two parents. And this search led to the seizure of a 1964 green AMC Rambler, which was a pretty significant find because remember, like I said, in 2016, the FBI had released those images of a car that they believe could have been connected or a car similar to that. So this was a green 1964 AMC Rambler. So it did look very close to the car that was released in those FBI images. And investigators noted that when they so they seized the vehicle and they towed it away, but they did note that there was some visible front end damage to the vehicle, which was interesting. And so they actually found out that Roy Dedman, he has a total of 29 cars registered in his name. 3 of them were green. So, I mean, that could be a red herring, who knows? But he does have 3 cars that are known to be registered in his name. But the car wasn't the only thing that authorities took from the property. They also confiscated journals, like some of the daughters' journals, their cameras, and also some children's clothing. And additional search warrants were issued for properties linked to Russell Underhill. And one of the things is that there is no known connection between Asia's family and the Dedman family or this Russell Underhill. So there really would be no reason for their DNA to be on these items unless they were somehow linked or unless they somehow came into contact with these items somehow, right? So it's not like they were old family friends and there could be DNA transferred there just if they're always around or if they were in the Degree home or something like that. They aren't known to have frequented the same place. They didn't go to the same church. They didn't, the schools, kids didn't go to the same schools or anything like that. So that was obviously an important thing to note too, right? There's no natural reason why their DNA would be on these items unless they had come into contact with them somehow. And you don't really come into contact. Oh, go ahead.
So did the 2 girls go to the same school? In the same class?
Well, no, because like I said, Annalee was 13.
Oh, yes.
So maybe the same school because she was 13 at the time and Asia was 9. So depending on.
Did they have any of the same friends? Do you know, or that's not detailed that we know?
Well, no, there's no known connection. So that's what.
Oh, okay.
There's no, the family I'm assuming has talked to investigators. They haven't been able to trace or link the kids to Asia or to Asia's family in any way. So
what about the damage to the car? Was it did they say it was old damage or was it recently new? Because he could have been driving that car for today.
Yeah. Well, I don't think any specifics about that really came up. It was just they noticed there was front end damage. So whether it was happened just recently or had happened a long time ago, they don't know, but there was some damage to the car. And they have a picture of the vehicle when they're towing it away or they're seizing it, and you can see the front end of it is pretty banged up. So there's also the investigators also, because after these DNA profiles came back, obviously connecting them to Annalee Dedman and Russell Underhill, obviously the police did extensive histories of this family and kind of looking at any connections they could possibly find or the nature of the relationship between Russell Underhill and the Dedman family. Was he just a tenant? Was there something else going on? So they did find that in February of 2000, so around the time that Asia would have went missing, Russell Underhill was receiving treatment at Cleveland Healthcare. So it was a healthcare facility that the Dedman family was involved with. So I know there was some things that the Dedman family, they did own a healthcare facility of some sort as well. I don't know if it's the same one. I think it might have been a different one than the one that Russell was attending, but there was some connection there. And so Roy Dedman's daughter, Lizzie, so she would often transport patients between their homes and the facility that Russell was attending, so Cleveland Healthcare. And the road where Asia was last seen walking when she went missing was just a 6-minute drive from the Dedman's home and directly along the route that Lizzie would have frequently been using and driving often. So
can I make a speculation? Or is it too soon?
Yeah.
Can I?
I was just gonna say, like, the implication is somehow, like, could this be a connection? Like, could she be involved somehow? Like, did she accidentally hit Asia when Asia was walking along the side of the street? Like I said, it was dark. It was stormy.
Except for your
The weird.
muted
I mean,
calls.
I was gonna say like a hit and run.
That's what
That's
I
exactly
as
what
soon
it
as
yeah,
you said
yeah.
there was front end damage, I was
Yeah.
like, yeah. Or not even a hit and run, like a hit, and then they panicked
And
and, like, instead of reporting it, they, like, put her in the car and took her back with them or something.
yeah, and I think that's kind of like the implication based on all these details. And that's why I think part of the investigation too is trying to figure out like what route, because I think, um, like I said, the route that Asia was last seen walking was just 6 minute drive away from the Deadman home. And like I said, directly along the route that Lizzie would have frequently used, or this would have been a route that would have been like a very, what's the word, like popular option. Like it was the quickest way or something. So it's like, you're more than likely going to be taking that road to get to that healthcare facility. If you're going to be driving from their home to there, it's like the main route that you would take.
was it like a
So
rainy day that day? Do you
yes, it was
remember?
stormy. Like I
Stormy,
said, it
yeah.
was stormy. It
Yeah.
was
Like a
like
stormy
a
night, right?
hurricane.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why it was also super weird that this 9-year-old girl would just get out of her house and walk um out of the house during a storm. No,
Yeah,
I mean
that's
it's
what
weird in the middle of the night anyway, but during a storm
yeah.
especially.
That's what I'm thinking, like, oh, maybe it kinda makes sense if it was, like, she got hit by a car because it was so dark and stormy, but the fact that she was even out there in the first place, it doesn't add up. So, that's the weird part.
Yeah, yeah, and like if you remember from when we talked about this case before, like there had been like a couple of witnesses who said that they saw her along the highway walking. One said that they kind of saw her and then she had ran into the woods at one point, like maybe she got scared or something and ran off into the woods, and that was like the last known sighting. So, um, so yeah, so there were people who did see her walking along this road. Like I said, it's stormy, dark, and anyway, so that's kind of just an interesting piece because it's going to be really important mapping out the route between this healthcare facility, the Deadman home, the Asia family, the Degree family home, and all that stuff. And kind of like, it's a very close in proximity. So these are events that could have been happening around the same time. So, so that was kind of initially the information that came out in September of 2024. So that's really all I knew. Like a week ago, I thought that was the extent of the updates, that they had seized this car, they had done a search warrant at the home of the Deadman family, and that they had taken like a bunch of items. But they did also say in September that they didn't find any human remains. Um, there were no items in the properties that they searched that could definitively say that they belonged to Asia. Like there was nothing that they found that could directly link Asia to the home in any way through belongings or remains or anything like that. So like I said, that was kind of initially what came out in September. And then the most recent developments, which is kind of crazy, the timing of all this, because the new developments came out in February, early to mid-February, which was the exact 25 years to almost the day that Asia had gone missing. Because like I said, she went missing on February 14th of 2000. And like all of this stuff is happening in early February of 2025, which is crazy. So in February 2025, search warrants were executed on the Deadman's 3 daughters. So the homes of the 3 daughters of this family. So they are Lizzie, who's Lizzie Foster. So her last name now is Foster. Then Sarah Deadman and Anna Lee Deadman. And so, so Lizzie's the oldest. She would have been 16 at the time that Asia went missing. Sarah was the middle daughter. She would have been 15. And Annalie was the youngest. Like I said before, she was 13 at the time. And so these search warrants that had happened in February actually kind of revealed there was this shocking development because investigators had actually been secretly monitoring the Deadman's family's text messages for months. So from September to February, they had tapped their phones or they were monitoring their cell phone activity and all of their text messages for those months-long period. And so yeah, and obviously I'm going to get into a little bit more about what some of the content of those text messages are, because it's pretty telling, I think. But also, around the same time that these developments in September were happening, there was a man that had actually come forward. So he must have seen the news and the developments in September that the Deadman family had their house, raided, I guess you could say, with some of their stuff taken, because this guy, he comes forward, claims that years ago, he actually used to hang out with Lizzie, the oldest daughter. And so they would go to like bars and house parties and stuff together around that time back in 2000. And he said that he was at a party where Lizzie was, and he said that she was, quote, sobbing and bawling, end quote. And she reportedly said, "I killed Asha Degree." And so Lizzie's sister, Sarah, was actually there at the party as well. And when she heard Lizzie like saying this, because Lizzie was obviously probably pretty drunk and just kind of being hysterical. So Sarah saw this and reacted immediately. She grabbed Lizzie's head and started yelling at her to shut the fuck up. The man was obviously stunned by this. And he later reported this incident to the authorities. So, of course, didn't report it at the time. He's coming forward now in September 2024 saying that this had happened. So that's interesting. Kind of weird. I mean, and they did as far as I know, they did do a polygraph test, and I know polygraphs aren't like the end all be all, but he did agree to do a polygraph test and he passed it. So they don't really have any reason to believe that he'd be lying about this. Just kind of unfortunate that he didn't, come forward many, many years ago, which is very annoying. But anyway, he came forward now, which is, I guess, the most important thing. And so search warrants for Lizzie's phone uncovered some pretty alarming messages that were exchanged between the three sisters in the days after the September 2024 search. So Sarah actually texts Lizzie saying, quote, "This is a nightmare. I'm like shaking. I can't walk now either." And there's also a text message from Lizzie's ex-husband who said that he was sorry for what their family was going through. Anna Lee, so the youngest daughter, also told her sister Lizzie, quote, "You don't need to be talking to anyone," end quote, urging her to break off any communication about the case without an attorney present. And then Lizzie texted her ex-husband again, "I'm just so worried. So worried. I mean, it's a nightmare that's going to keep getting worse. I can see nothing good happening anytime soon, and I'm an optimist." And she later told him, quote, "There is no way this is going to be okay," end quote. And then Lizzie also texted Sarah on September 12th, saying that investigators believed she could be the suspect. Quote, "I just talked to David Teddy," end quote, which is their attorney. And she says, "The theory is I did it, accident, covered it up," end quote. So Lizzie
That's
then
super
also...
sus. Like,
Yeah, super.
pretty much know what happened.
Super sketchy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Super sketchy. And Lizzie sends a text message to her ex-husband again that she, quote, "caused this," end quote. And then further text messages reveal a scramble between all these people over what to do in light of the September 2024 developments. So Sarah texts, quote, "They think it's our shirt. It's not her shirt. Her mom said it wasn't hers," end quote. So that must be referring to, I'm assuming, the New Kids on the Block shirt that was found in Asia's backpack. Because the family came out after those developments happened, like back in 2001. And she's like, "That's not Asia's shirt. And no one in the family has that shirt." So Sarah is here texting her sister saying they think it's our shirt. And then Sarah also says, "I don't remember that shirt. I'm
But
scared
why would
though. Dad is..."
sorry. But why would the
Go
shirt
ahead.
be why would their shirt be in her backpack?
Good
Like
question.
maybe did it have like some type of like blood on it? Did it have like why would I don't
Yeah.
They could have just
understand.
been like panicking and like gathering a bunch of stuff and like just grabbed it by accident and like put it with her stuff. I don't know. Or like, yeah, it could have been somewhere where Asia was too and had like blood or something on it. So they just all shoved it together.
Yeah. But also, like, if you're going to do that, like, maybe don't put the DNA stained shirt in the bag with Asia's stuff, because that's going to connect you to Asia. Like, if you want to just dispose of the shirt some other way, no one's going to connect it necessarily.
Well, yeah. And also don't wrap it in plastic and then bury it. I feel like that preserved it nicely. Like, You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
if they would
Yeah,
have
like
buried
those
it without
trash
that,
bags.
yeah, it would have,
Yeah.
like, disintegrated a lot quicker.
Yeah, and I think it was, like, the DNA that was found on the shirt, I think it was, like, a strand of hair or something that was tied to Annalee Dedman, so it had her hair on it. I think that's what the connection was there. Um, and then yeah, so then Sarah texts again, "Lizzie, can you talk?" Sarah says, "This is a nightmare. I'm, like, shaking. I can't walk now either." Annalee says, "Lizzie, you don't need to be talking to anyone. I'm in the lawyer's office." Annalee says, "Oh," so she says, I'm at the lawyer's office," and then she says another text now. So it must have just been a continuation. "They advise that we should all not talk to them without representation." And then Lizzie texts, "This is going to get nothing but worse. I'm going to my doctor at 5 to get something for my nerves." And then Lizzie says, "I'm just so worried, so worried." And then the text that I mentioned earlier about saying she's an optimist, but she can't really see anything good happening. Um, Lizzie asks, quote, "What's going to happen to me since I wouldn't talk to them? I'm afraid it's going to get worse." Well, he told me it's going to. And Sarah says, "I know, girl, I am a disaster." Sarah says, quote, "I think if they come at you again, you just go and be compliant." Because I guess at one point, they did visit Lizzie and she refused to talk to the investigators. Whereas other people in the family, they were being more cooperative, or at least I think Annalee and probably Sarah were, but Lizzie probably put up a little bit more of a fight.
I
And
feel like
so Sarah says,
so I feel
"Mhm,
like if they just came forward at the beginning, like it now just made it worse for them because they've waited so long.
Yeah,
They hid it
for
so long.
sure.
Like I don't understand. Like they're all worried now. Well, yeah, if you did the right thing in the first place, you wouldn't be in this situation. Now you have families probably and like a life that now you can be ruined because you decided to make a stupid decision.
Especially if it was the second accident, then obviously they would still be, you know, in trouble for it, but it's not like they, like, tried to hide it for all these years. Like, yeah, obviously coming forward would have been the right thing to do, smarter.
yeah, yeah." And, and so Lizzie says, yeah, so she says, "I think if they come at you again, you just go and be compliant. That's what I'm planning on doing." And then Lizzie says, "I think so too. Honestly, I mean, I want to do what Dad says, but damn." And then Sarah says, "And maybe we should have let you do what you originally wanted to do." End quote. So maybe that's inferring, maybe we should have let you maybe we should have let you report it, go to the police like you originally wanted to do, or whatever. I don't really know
Oh,
what
so
it's
it was like
inferring
they
to.
were
That's just my
convincing her
guess.
not to, kind of.
I just feel like why did everybody in that family decided not to do the right thing, like including including the parents. Like I don't understand. Like your children did something possibly by accident, but you're gonna everybody's gonna hide it up and shut their mouths and say nothing. Like that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. And like, of course, this is all alleged. Like this stuff is like these are the transcripts from the texts, and this is all the stuff in the search warrant, but obviously they haven't been charged with anything at this point. So it's just like what's out there. And obviously these are just us drawing our own conclusions. So I just want to put that out there too. Um, so back in September when all of these new developments were happening, Lizzie did refuse to take a polygraph test because they had asked her to do that. Um, but she actually agreed to one in February. So I think it was February 13th. She did one, and she was the results indicated that she was being deceptive in her responses. Obviously, like we said, polygraphs aren't like the end all be all. It doesn't prove guilt or anything, but um, obviously it makes investigators a little bit more interested or like wanting to dig a little bit deeper and find out more. So just tons of stuff that doesn't really look good right away. So yeah, so there's even more, if you can believe. So this goes back to September again, September 2024, while the police and the FBI were executing these search warrants when they seized the green car from the Dedman owned property. So I don't know, actually, I think the property that they seized the car from, it wasn't one where like the family was currently living. They just owned the property and someone else was renting it out at the time. And so the home's current tenant, because obviously they would have talked to the person who was currently living there, and he told the police that he had been living there for years, but he says that inside of the home, and he didn't indicate how long he'd been living there, just that he had been living there for years, but he says that inside the home, there was these like 3 rooms that had been padlocked shut, and he was told never to go in them or to try to get inside or whatever. So he said that was weird. And then the police also talked to someone else named Laura Dedman, so obviously somehow related to the family. I don't know how, but she has the same last name. And she recalls seeing Roy Dedman, so the father. He was digging a chest-deep hole on that same property where this car was seized from years prior. And like not even like years ago, like right around the time of this, like it was years. So like at least from like 2016 on. So more recently, like somewhat recently, but not like just a year ago or something. It was like several years, but not in 2000. So she saw him in the yard digging this hole that was chest deep. It was just weird. But
See,
despite all of this, like, oh, go ahead.
So to me, if that person told me not to go in those rooms, my like brain would be like, I want to know what's in those rooms. I'm gonna get in those rooms. But I don't know. That's just me. But the whole thing is really, really creepy.
Yeah, and I mean, like that could be a total red herring. Like, there could be a million reasons why he doesn't want people to go in that room. Like, who knows? But just when you kind of line it up against all the other stuff that's coming out, like it adds to the suspicion. So I have no idea if those padlocked rooms have anything to do with this case, but that's just what the tenant who's living in that property said. So despite all these findings, so like I said, there were no human remains or definitive evidence of Asia's whereabouts that were discovered on any of these properties. So, but law enforcement did state that they believe that Asia was the victim of a homicide and that her body was being concealed in some way. So I don't know, like, I didn't know. I don't know if they like went and dug up like the yard or whatever. I'm sure maybe they had cadaver dogs and stuff, but like whatever they did, they didn't find any human remains or evidence of the sign, like indication of human remains at all. So who knows what that hole was for that Roy was allegedly digging, according to Laura. That could also be something that's not connected. I mean, like when you line it, like I said, when you line it up against everything else, super sketchy. But whether it's actually related or not, we don't know at this time. And so, so on February 8th, 2025, as these new details were kind of unraveling, the community of Shelby, North Carolina, they gathered once again to honor Asia's memory because, they would do these gatherings semi-frequently to like, kind of like hold vigils for her. And there was so many unanswered questions for so long. And there was like, it was a cold case pretty much from like 2001 up until recently. So the annual vigil had always been a solemn occasion, but this year it carried, a sense of hope or anticipation because of all these new developments that were happening. So Sheriff Alan Norman addressed the crowd at this vigil with conviction. He said, quote, "This investigation is very much alive and we are closer than ever to finding the truth." And we just passed the 25-year anniversary of her disappearance. And those are the developments that have come out recently. So kind of lots to sort of unpack there. I don't know. And we kind of talked through some of it, but also there was the attorney for the family. So I had his name here earlier, David Teddy, I think it is. I just want to make sure that is what it was. Yeah, David Teddy, I think, is the family's attorney, or Roy Dedman's attorney. And he did, like back in September, when the car was seized and all this stuff, they did do a press conference and the family's attorney spoke out and he did say something like he believes that the evidence is going to show that a deceased person is responsible for what happened to Asia, kind of insinuating that it's going to be that Russell Underhill guy who died in 2004. And like, to me, it seems like super like annoying, like just to pin it on the dead guy who can't defend himself in any way. So it also seems like just an easy thing to do. Like, are they hoping that by saying that either they believe it or they're just saying that hoping like, oh, well, if they think it's a dead person who did it, then the investigation's going to stop because there's no one else that you can really hold accountable. You can't go after a dead guy, so we'll just blame it on him. So who knows? But
I don't think the investigation would stop though. Like they would still want to find out who did it, even if he was dead, right? They're not going to be like, "Oh, it was probably him." We're not going to keep going on this. Like they'll still want to figure it out.
yeah. And so I'm wondering if like maybe if Russell didn't have anything to do with it, but maybe his DNA was just on those items because like he was living in a home that they owned, like he was in the car, like I said, Lizzie would transport him to and from the hospital from his home. So like his DNA would have been in the car. So like if Asia's backpack is in the car, could have been like cross-contaminated with Russell's DNA, even though Russell wasn't actually there when something happened or something like that. So that was my thought. So like maybe Russell just wasn't involved at all, but just happened to have his DNA kind of tied into all of this. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it seems pretty clear, like we talked about before, like kind of insinuating that it was some type of accident, like a hit and run accident. But also, I don't really know the details of like somebody said, well, the reason that they had released photos of that car in 2016 was because they believed that someone who matched Asia's description was like last seen getting into this car with this description. But like, we don't know the nature of like how she got in. Like, was she being carried in the car? Was she going like seen getting into the car? Like she was still conscious? Like that's what we still don't know. Because obviously if it was a hit and run, she's not really going to be walking into the car voluntarily. She's going to be like carried into the car or whatever, right? So yeah, we don't really know like those details at all. And also, even if like this all comes out and it ends up being this family that was involved, that still really doesn't solve the mystery of like why she left the house in the first place. Like you said, like she was out, like if it was all an accident and it was a hit and run by accident, she was still out there by herself for some reason, walking in the middle of a storm away from her house, which is just weird in and of itself. So like it solves the mystery of what ultimately happened, but it doesn't really solve the mystery of why she was there in the first place. So I guess you guys have, I mean, you talked a little bit about it, but like thoughts about the potential hit and run theory that is kind of alluding to, or what are your kind of thoughts?
I just think, why would you confess, like, when she was at that party or whatever, crying, saying she did it? Like, there's zero reason why someone would do that randomly. It's not like, because, people falsely confess all the time when they're being interrogated, but she was just randomly at a party and said that. So I feel like that people don't just do that for no reason. So she obviously had like a guilty conscience or whatever. So that's what I think.
Yeah. And unless that guy who went to the authorities is making that up, and that never happened.
But then why would he make that up though? That
Yeah,
doesn't make
that's
any
true.
sense. Like, he doesn't
Yeah,
gain
I mean,
anything from it.
yeah. I mean, like, yeah. They, like I said, they gave him a polygraph and he passed it, so they don't have any reason to think he's lying. But like, people lie about stuff all the time. They want to like, maybe he has it out for this family for some other reason, and like saw that there was like FBI at the house seizing items. He's like, I'm going to take this opportunity to like, I mean, not saying that I doubt that would happen, but like people do crazy things all the time. I don't tend to believe that he was lying, because when you look at all the texts between the sisters and all the stuff, like it seems like pretty legit. But, and also like came forward and said this like before all of these texts were released to the public through the search warrant. So like he wouldn't have necessarily, all he would have known at the time was that, I don't even think the extent of the evidence that the FBI had that caused the search warrant was even out there at the time. I think it was just like they had enough evidence to conduct the search warrant, whatever it was. So all he knew was that like this car was being towed from this house. So he wouldn't have even known anything about like that Annalise DNA was found on the items, or that it was the sisters, you know what I'm saying? So, and obviously the sisters didn't live at that property at that time. So when you like match up his story with like the texts between them, it just kind of paints this image that maybe it was an accident caused by, if one of the sisters was driving. And I believe also too, one thing that came out was that Sarah said to investigators back in September that like when she was 15, her dad had given her this green car, like it was her car or something. He had given it to her when she was 15, and she was, I think, 16. Or no, she would have been 15 at the time, I think, that Asia went missing. But anyway, yeah, so just super sketchy. Super sketchy. And that's really all we know at this point. I mean, it's tons of new evidence, tons of new stuff. So it'll be very interesting to see where it all goes. And yeah, everything, of course, like I said, I'm going to say it again, everything's all alleged at this time. We don't know. They haven't been charged. I think there was also some stuff said, like, the police or the investigators were like trying to push for like them to be the sisters, or at least one of the sisters, to be charged with like felony obstruction of justice. So that's going to be like the charge or like the angle I think they're going for, because it's clear from those texts that they were withholding information. Like Lizzie wasn't cooperative at first, and maybe they withheld information that ended up being like that was able to be proven that maybe they lied about or whatever. So I think there's like the felony obstruction charge that they might be facing soon, even if it's not necessarily a murder charge. So, or
yeah, it's like they for
manslaughter
sure
charge.
know something, whether they did it intentionally or by accident. Like they for sure know something. So
Like
that they've been
yeah, 'cause
holding.
like a part of me wants to like believe she just got like hit by a car and died and they cover it up, but the other part of me wants to believe. Well, the other part of me is like, why was she out there in the middle of the storm? Was she lured there and then they picked her up and killed her? Like, I don't want to believe that, because I don't want to believe that she died being tortured. Like, I just want to believe that she like got hit by a car and they're covering it up. But I don't know, that whole her leaving the house in the storm just makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I said, it's really, if it ends up being this family is involved, it doesn't solve the first part. Because like I said, they have yet to uncover any relation or like connection between Asia's family and the Deadman family. So it's not like, so then the question would be like, well, it was someone in the Deadman family who lured her out. Like, did she know this family? She met them and they, met her somewhere and abducted her, or was it just an accident? But like I said, if it was just an accident, we have no idea why she was heading out in this middle of a storm in the middle of the night. So just super weird. And also we still don't know, like, I still want to know where the shed comes in. Like, 'cause some of her belongings were found in that shed along with that picture of that unknown girl. So it's like, why would her belongings also be in the shed? Was that like some type of like cover up job? Like maybe they're like, oh, we're going to put some belongings here to like lead investigators somewhere. Like, but to me, that seems kind of risky in and of itself. It's like, why would you do that? Like, just don't put any belongings
leave
anywhere.
stuff out in the open to be found. Kind of like that does seem risky.
Yeah, especially because like
So
you could have
weird.
DNA. You could have your DNA on those items. Like they,
Mhm.
like they could have tested those items back then. Who knows? And like could have been led to the real person based on those items. So it's like a real risk to like just drop items somewhere as like a red herring. So maybe like Asia was in that shed like on her own somehow before she got hit. Like maybe she went, because it was raining really bad. So maybe she went into the shed for like cover from the rain. And there was like candy wrappers and stuff. So maybe she was like rooting through her bag and that stuff had fallen out or something, or she was eating candy or something and then left and then was hit after. So I don't really know how it all comes together. Because I kind of went down the Reddit rabbit hole and there were some people who think like that shed stuff was like planted there by like the real person to like throw them off the trail. But yeah, I don't know. Super weird. Super weird. And it's exciting that there's some developments and like pretty significant developments, right? It's not just like, oh, some person came forward with this alleged story. It's like, no, there's actual like text message trail, like evidence or whatever. And I don't really know. Obviously, they're working really hard to like, would that be considered circumstantial evidence? Like just these conversations? Like probably, because there's no explicit there's no admitting of anything in that. It's just sort of like implied.
Well, I think their DNA on her stuff is not circumstantial. Like that's actual legit evidence.
Yeah, true. But then they're going to run into the whole thing. Like even if they, they are charges, there are charges that are connecting them to the disappearance because of the DNA. It's like, then it kind of goes to the thing of like, it's really hard without a body to determine. Like murder, trying to charge someone for murder without a body is really hard because you have no evidence of how they died. You have no evidence that they're actually dead. So you have to like prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they're dead when you have no proof that they actually are. unless there's like a text message where someone says
Well,
explicitly,
yeah.
but that's still not full proof. Like anyone
I
could write
mean,
a text message.
yeah. And their defense could be like, yeah, we did come in contact with her, but like we
Mm,
tried to help her, but she ran off and then something happened to her after that. That's why our DNA's with her stuff kind of
mm,
thing. So yeah, without like a body to see what actually happened to her, then and it's crazy that they couldn't find any remains on their properties at all. Like, because even if there was a body there and it was moved, like cadaver dogs and things can like pick that up, so they would have known if she actually had been there. So it's crazy that they haven't really found her remains at all.
yeah. Or like any definitive evidence that she was even there in the house at any time. No, out of her, none of her other belongings or like DNA from her. But mind you, it has also been 25 years since. So it could be really hard to find like a little like something that belonged to her that would be in the house. Like who knows? I don't know. But just super. And also I was thinking too, like maybe that green car that had the front end damage, like maybe it had never been driven again since the accident. It was just parked in that yard for 25 years because maybe they didn't want to like bring it in for work because then it could be tied. Like somebody brought in their car to get front end work done.
Yeah, because I'm sure the
right
police
after.
like would be on the lookout for that kind of thing, and they'd probably go around to all like the dealerships and or like the garages and shops and be like, if somebody matching this description of a car comes in, let us know. So I don't know if they knew that, but they probably didn't want to like risk taking this car out in public after that.
Yeah. Yeah. So to me, when I was like thinking about it, I was like that, that could have been that car hasn't been driven in maybe 25 years, just parked in this yard. But I mean, why would you not just want to get rid of it altogether? Like, why keep that car there? You're not going to drive it. It's not useful for anything. You're not going to fix it. But also, you could fix it like 10 years later, 20 years later. Like,
Yeah, it's true.
I don't know. Like, to me, I don't know. So who knows? But super, super weird. And yeah. So like I said, seems like we're getting very, very close to potentially solving this. And because the most recent updates are so recent, um, we could see something very, very soon. Like there could be official charges that get filed or something like that. So we're going to keep our eyes peeled to see what comes of this, because obviously, and like when we were talking about this case, you always want to like be somewhat hopeful, but you're also thinking like it's been 25 years. There's no trace of her. Like, what are the chances that they're ever really going to solve this? Because a lot can happen in 25 years. And also the fact that it was so close in proximity. This family lives 6 minutes away. Like, the fact that this family may have allegedly known something. I mean, I think we say allegedly, right? Because it's still alleged, but like, I mean, it's clear that they know something based on those text messages. I don't know. Like, I don't think that's allegedly because we see the
Yeah.
text
Yeah,
that
especially when they're like
indicate that. I
private
don't know.
messages between each other. Like they never once say like, I can't believe like they think we did this. I had nothing to do with it. And like I can't or like anything like that. It's always like, this is gonna get worse. Like this isn't good. So like obviously that like the implication that like they're worried about something, not like this is crazy. Like why are they even looking at us? It's like yeah, this is bad. So yeah, that doesn't look good for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're like, Dad's going to be probably a pretty big suspect or something. Like, that's what
Yeah,
one of the texts
yeah, you
said.
don't say
Like,
that if there's not something actually going on.
yeah. Like, if you knew your dad had nothing to do with it, why would you even say that? It's just
Yeah,
weird. Um,
exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, it is allegedly, right? Because obviously everything's allegedly until it's proven in court. But yeah, super weird, super crazy. But the investigation is still very much ongoing. So there's still lots of stuff, like I said, that could come out. And there are going to be probably accepting tips still. So if you know anything about this case, anything else in addition to what's already out there, call the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office at 704-484-4788 or the FBI Charlotte office at 704-672-6100. So that does it for this update episode. And like I said, we'll update you. Maybe we'll do another episode later on, like if there's additional stuff that comes out, because we would like to keep up to date on like what's happening in this case, because it'll be really interesting to see how it all plays out. So thank you so much for tuning in. You can follow us on all the social medias, like we've always said. Facebook, Crime Family Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at Crime Family Podcast. We have TikTok crimefamilypod. And you can email us at crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com if you have case suggestions or just thoughts about the show. And leave us a review, comments, all that stuff on our YouTube channel as well, Crime Family Podcast on YouTube. So thank you so much. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode. So until then, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.